Hello everybody and welcome to 1 Plus Armor and our 10-part series on how to play Warhammer 40k. If you're a veteran player, I hope you enjoy these videos, and if you're a new player, I really hope that after watching this series of videos, you'll be able to just dive right in and get involved in this amazing complex game. So my name is Darren and I'm going to be the host for these videos. And what you're going to find is the complex rules split up into a 10-part series that will try and make the videos quite basic. So just the real basic core rules. We're not going to be covering tactics or complex rules interactions or all those sorts of things. We're just basically going through the rule book and covering all the basic rules in there so that anybody can dive right into a game of 40k. A little bit of a disclaimer, so if I get anything wrong, please comments and correct in below the video. That will help us to make these videos as good and as accurate as possible. We can release some errata videos if necessary. And another note, you can find the list of episodes in the show notes below, and the one that we're on currently will be bolded, and you'll see that on every episode. And finally, you'll note if you look at that the last episode in the series will actually be a little mini game that we play, where people will talk through the actual mechanics of how they're playing the game as opposed to why they're moving things or the strategies behind what they're doing. So hopefully that will be a nice way of wrapping everything. You need the rulebook, and this is the sort of mini rulebook which just comes with all the rules. You can get the more large core rulebook that also has a lot of fluff, maybe twice the size, but covering fluff at the beginning, and it's probably a little bit bigger and maybe hardcover. There are many versions of this rulebook depending on what kind of box set or where you get it, but that's basically what you need is the core rulebook, and that covers all the rules. And this series will basically cover the rulebook. You will need models, and which models you pick and which armies you start to play is a complex discussion for another time, but you need some kind of models to play. And then we won't talk about the hobby side of things and painting and stuff, but obviously it's really nice to have nicely painted models. So we've got a bunch of models here that we're going to use for purposes of demonstration. And finally, when you really get into an army and you kind of need their codex. So a codex is basically the collection of fluff and rules for a particular army. And if you want to play that army, generally you need to get their codex, all right? Because it gives you all the information that you need to play that army, okay? The codexes are quite nice books in and of themselves. They're usually hardcover. The artwork is usually fantastic. Usually about half of it or more is just information and fluff if you're into that side of the game. And then the rest of it is all the rules that you need. So you do need a codex or 2 or 3 depending on what armies that you are playing. You will need a tape measure. I just have this little tape measure here that I got from the hardware store for like $3. You can get big construction ones. Games Workshop will make ones specially for gaming, although functionally they're not any different from a normal tape measure. You will need some kind of a tape measure because things in the game revolve around measuring. So you'll need a tape measure. And I recommend one of these stiff retractable ones as opposed to a floppy one that you would use for like making clothes and stuff. Okay. You will need some dice. It's a game of dice. So you'll need dice. You'll need normal 6-sided dice, and you'll need these special scatter dice. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But you will need these various forms of dice. And you'll need a template set. So this is just a basic Games Workshop template set for certain weapons that use area of effect markers. And there are bigger ones than this too, but this is kind of the basic set, and we'll talk about those in a second, but you'll need some blast markers. Okay, so the next question is, where can you play Warhammer? Well, just play it in your basement. So this is my new basement wargaming studio, basically. And so, you know, I've gone to a lot of trouble here to get tables and studio lights for filming, and I've set up this nice table with the gaming mat and the scenery. We've got, you know, grass and rocks and stuff just to add to the immersion of the table. But really, to get started playing Warhammer, you just need a table. It doesn't even need to be 4x6, which is the size of the Warhammer gaming platform. But you could just use any old table. If you have a small number of models, you could just start on a small table like this. You can use any old table. You could even play on the floor. Just play on the floor, put a little carpet down, or just play straight on the floor. So these are places that you can play just in your own home. Of course, you can go to your friendly local game store. And if they don't actually play Warhammer already, I'm sure they usually have tables that could ask very nicely. You could borrow one of them for a period of time every week and play some Warhammer. You can play at your friend's house if you know friends who play. And of course, a lot of major metropolis cities will have a Games Workshop store, and they will be more than happy to get you playing. Okay, so the rest of this first episode here, now that we've covered those basic aspects, we'll be covering definitions of things and a little bit of the basic principles and surrounding playing a game of Warhammer 40k. So, you know, there's a lot of unbreakable basic principles, which for the most part are constant throughout the game, no matter what type of game you're playing or what armies you're playing with. And we're going to go over those things right now. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a model profile. So what we've got here is one of my models here, Castellan Crow, who's a Grey Knight. When you open the Codex, what you're going to see is the picture of the data sheet, as they call it, which is what Castellan Crow is. So this skull symbol means he's the headquarters or HQ unit. And he's worth 175 points. His name is Castellan Crow. That is what he looks like, and that is how he's painted. Of course, you can paint him however you like, but you see that the model here is the same as the picture. And then underneath it, or you're going to get some fluff here, and then underneath it, you're going to get the character profiles. So we're going to go through the unit profile and what all these letters mean. Let's try and zoom it in here. Okay. So the first thing you'll see, so this is Castellan Crow, that's the name of the figure or the model. And we'll just skip over here for a minute. So this is the unit type, is that he's an infantry unit and a character. We'll go over that maybe in another 2 or 3 episodes, the different character types, but that's what he is. So he's just a single model. And his unit, and we're going to define that in a second, would be defined as just him. So here is the profile or stat line for any infantry or non-vehicle type model in Warhammer 40k, and we're going to go over what all these mean in a second. So WS stands for weapon skill, and basically this is a number from 0 to 10, which indicates how good that model is in close combat. So an 8 is pretty good. Basically how hard it is for you to hit your opponent in melee combat depends on the difference between your and your opponent's weapon skill. Okay, so that's weapon skill. Ballistic skill, or BS, is the model's ability to fire a ranged weapon. Okay, and that also again ranges from 0 to 10. 4 is sort of your average for a Space Marine type character. And basically, we'll go over that when we go into the shooting phase, but the higher this is, obviously, the easier it is for you to hit your opponent with a ranged weapon. S is for strength. Strength is the how strong the model hits in close combat generally. And so, again, 0 to 10, and 1 to 10, and the higher this is, the easier it is for you to wound your opponent in combat. Your toughness, or T, is how resilient your character is to withstanding damage. And basically, toughness is usually compared to attacker or a weapon's strength value, and depending on how those two compare, it will determine how easy it is for your opponent to wound your model. Okay. W stands for wounds, and it's the number of wounds this model has before it's dead. Okay, so 2 wounds here. So once you take 2 wounds, you're dead. I stands for initiative, and initiative is basically a number which indicates how quickly your model does things. It's most commonly used in close combat to determine who gets to attack first, but it can be used for other things that we're going to talk about briefly in a second, but that's the most common use for initiative. A stands for attacks, 3 attacks. Attacks is the number of times you get to swing at your opponents in close combat. All right. Leadership is a number that kind of represents how strong of will your model is. The leadership value is used for all sorts of things that we're going to cover later in this series, including whether or not you flee from combat, whether or not you pass the ability to sort of give orders to your comrades and things like that. So leadership is an important stat, and that is LD. Of note, all of these are numbers generally from 1 to 10, 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, okay? And SV stands for save. So this is just the armor save of the model, depending on what armor they're wearing. 2+ means in order to save a wound that's done to your model, you need to roll an armor save of 2 or more on a 6-sided dice. Okay, so that's basically the definition of a unit profile and what all their basic statistics mean. Okay, welcome back. We're going to talk about a very important concept in Warhammer 40k, which is the unit. A unit is basically a group of models that can range anywhere from just a single model to tens of models. And any models that are in a unit have to stay together when they move. They have to shoot at the same target. They have to assault the same target. They take leadership tests and fear tests and fallback tests all as the same target. So they're all doing things as a group. So you can imagine in a normal army, it's your basic fighting squad or your basic, a 10-man squad of something. So the unit is the basic fighting squad in Warhammer 40k. So we've got some models here, and we've got our Castle and Crow. And we've got Drago here, and these two are called independent characters, and so they form a unit just in and of themselves. So Castle and Crow, one model is a unit. Drago himself, one model is a unit. And these 4 guys here are just your basic infantry guys, and they form a unit, and their unit is made up of 4 models, okay? And it's very important when you look at rules, it's very specific whether something affects a unit, in which case it would affect all the models in the unit, or if something just affects a model, in which it would just affect one model in the unit. Okay, so that's a very important concept. So as part of the rules, single character units can join other units, and then now they all form a unit, and for all rules purposes they would be considered a unit even though these two are independent. Okay, so we'll go over that when we talk about the movement phase, but basically a unit is just a group of models working together. Okay, we've got our Dread Knight here, which is a unit. Okay, and he's a different type of model, but he's still considered a unit in and of himself. And we have our Land Raider here, which is a tank, but this tank itself is a unit. Okay, so that's basically the concept of unit. So one of the things that a unit has to do is stay in what they call unit coherency. So you can't have a one member of the unit here and then another member unit way over here. They need to stick together for maximum effect. So unit coherency is 2 inches. Okay, so here's 2 inches. 2 inches is how far each model can be from each other. So these models need to be within 2 inches of each other. Okay, otherwise they would be out of coherency, and in a lot of circumstances, if you leave coherency, you're dead. So you need to stay in coherency. So now each model in this unit is at least at most 2 inches from any other model in the unit, okay? And that is maintaining coherency. If you're in a vertical environment, such as the runes here, now your models, to maintain coherency, must be within 6 inches vertically, okay? So 6 inches, they're within 6 inches of each other vertically, they're still in coherency, okay? So the game does allow you to use terrain up and down in this way by expanding your coherency vertically to 6 inches, okay? But horizontally, you must be within 2 inches of each other to maintain coherency. Okay, so that's a pretty simple concept. There's almost never a time in the game where your models can remain out of coherency. I can't actually think of any, except maybe in multiple combats, but even then, no matter what happens in a game, coherency is one of the overriding fundamental rules that you must always observe, okay? Measuring is very important. This is a game of inches, and if you don't measure properly, you're going to A, be inaccurate, and B, you might piss people off. So you have to measure accurately in the game. Literally, something could be half an inch away from being in the target zone and not be affected. So it's quite important. So when you're measuring, you always measure generally from base to base. Okay, some war games don't measure using the base, but in Warhammer you do, and you measure from base to base. For vehicles, for example, that don't have bases, you usually measure from the hull, but for everything else that has a base, you usually measure from base to base. So let's, for example, these two models here need to be in coherency, okay? You don't measure from the tip of the sword to the tip of the sword. You measure from the base to base, okay? So as long as part of the base is at least within 2, they're in coherency, okay? If no part of the base is within 2 inches, now they're out of coherency, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. The other thing is you can't use your measuring to cheat. So we're going to cover it when we go into movement phase, but if you're going to move 6, then you measure from the back or the front of the base, and you go to the back or the front of the base. So you don't gain an extra, inch and a bit because of the actual base diameter, okay? Because otherwise, Dread Knights would have a big advantage there, okay? Because they got big bases. So that's another important aspect of measuring. And so the other aspect of measuring, is from model, as we said, to a vehicle. So you go from the base. If you're shooting at something, you generally go from the actual muzzle of the weapon, and then you measure it to your target, okay? So measuring is pretty important in the game. It's important to measure accurately. The game is a game of inches, so every inch counts, as they say. Okay, so this next section is on the humble dice. So Warhammer is based on D6, okay, and that's how you'll see it noted down in all the books, D6, and it's basically your normal 6-sided dice, okay? When you roll dice, it always tells you a number of dice to roll, 1d6, 2d6, 6d6, and that's how many dice that you use to roll, okay? Now, 1 is not always bad and 6 is not always good. It depends, but generally that's the case, but it really depends. So when you're asked to roll dice, you just roll dice as normal, okay? Now, any time that a game allows you or tells you to re-roll, generally, almost without exception, the original roll no longer counts and it's the re-roll that matters, okay? The other thing to note is that you are only ever allowed to re-roll a dice once. Okay, that's an almost unbroken rule throughout the game. You can only re-roll any one dice one time, and you have to take the re-roll, usually, okay? The reason I keep saying usually or almost any time is because there's always codex rules and special rules sometimes that break or alter these main core principles, but generally these principles are the ones that remain untouched no matter what happens in the rest of the game. Sometimes you're going to be asked to roll a d3. Well, there's no 3-sided dice as far as I know. The 4-sided dice is probably the smallest one. So what you do is you take a 6-sided dice, and 1 and 2 is a 1, 3 and 4 is a 2, and 5 and 6 is a 3. Okay, so a roll, this is a 6, so that would be a roll of 3, okay, on a d3. And this is a 3, so that would be a roll of 2 on a d3, okay? And finally, when you're asked to do checks against certain statistics, so a strength check or a toughness check or an initiative test or a leadership test, what you do is you roll 1d6 or 2d6 or whatever that thing tells you to roll, and you compare to that statistic, and you generally need to roll the statistic or lower for those effects to happen. So for example, if you're doing a leadership check and your leadership is 9, you need to roll 2d6 and you need to roll below 9 or below. So that's a 7, so that would be a pass. Okay, if you roll 10, 11 or 12, it would be a fail. So that's basically a stat check, like a strength test or a toughness test or an initiative test. Okay, this is a template. This is what's called a small blast template. This is a large blast template. There are larger ones than this. This is a flamer template. Okay, so this is kind of like the flame kind of shooting forth and out from a flamer type weapon, flamethrower or something like that. And when the weapon calls for use of a template, you just take one of these templates and you place it where you want as appropriate. Okay, so let's say, so my Dread Knight here has a flamer on his arm, so he can fire his flamer like this, and you can sort of use it to cover models and determine how many models that you hit. This other weapon that he has is a blast, so I decide, because I'm firing this, which is a psi cannon, okay, it has a small blast effect. You have to put the hole, generally you have to your target has to be in the empty hole there, so I'm going to target this guy, okay, and you put it on top, and now you always have to roll what's called the scatter dice, okay, so the scatter dice is a special d6, which has 4 sides have an arrow on it, and 2 sides have this bullseye marker, okay, so basically this tells you which way that this template scatters when you shoot it, okay, and obviously the arrow can land in any one of 360-degree directions, or it's a direct hit, okay, and then with the scatter dice you always roll 2d6, and that tells you how many inches this template will scatter when you fire it, okay, and that just represents the natural kind of, deviation of these kind of weapons. Okay, so let's do an example. So I'm targeting this guy here with my small blast template. I roll my scatter dice, which is a scatter of 10 in this downward direction, okay? Now, usually you have to subtract the ballistic skill from this, so this is one way that ballistic skill affects how accurate template weapons are. So the ballistic skill is 4, so 10 minus 4 is 6, so this scatters this way in 6 inches, okay? So what we do is you get your tape measure out, okay, and you measure 6 inches. The middle of the template goes 6 inches, and so it would actually land down here, and so would not end up hitting anybody, okay. We'll do another example. So this time it's 7 minus 4 equals 3, okay, so 3-inch scatter takes us to here, and again, it would not hit anybody. Okay, the final section of this first episode is going to talk about line of sight. So line of sight is an important concept in a game where you have to shoot things. And Warhammer works on true line of sight. So literally you have to get down to the model's level to look whether something has line of sight, okay? So here we've got our Dread Knight and he wants to shoot at these models here in the ruins. So you see, if we look at the ruins here, so you've got 2 models here in the ruins, okay? And the shooter has to physically be able to draw sight to any part of the model to say that it has line of sight. And by part of the model, we don't mean the tip of the sword or the banner. Actually has to be a physical part of the core part of the model, okay? So banners and wings, things like that don't count. Antennas, just the core part of the model, okay? And so if your Dread Knight can draw line of sight to these models, then you can target it. Okay? And so in our case here, the Dreadnought can see these models. Okay, so he could shoot these models. They would get cover save, obviously, because they're obscured, and we're going to cover that when we come to saves. But that's how it represents the fact that they're kind of hidden in the ruins, but they can actually shoot these guys. Now, let's say he's deciding to shoot these guys in the bottom of the ruins here. Okay, so you can see that there's two models he can see there. Okay, and he could shoot at those two models, but there's another model who was tucked into the corner there. Okay, that the Dreadnought cannot see. Okay, there's no way of it to see. Therefore, the Dreadnought can shoot this unit, yes, but no matter how many wounds are done, it could not injure the model that he cannot see. Okay, and that just kind of makes sense from a real life sort of way. Okay, so true line of sight is how targeting and shooting works. You have to be able to draw a little true line of sight from your model to what you're shooting. Okay. The other way this works is if these guys are shooting from the ruins out to here, only models that have line of sight out to here will be able to shoot. So if you go down here, that dude who's hidden behind the wall, he can't be shot at, yeah, but he also cannot shoot the Dreadnought back because he cannot see the Dreadnought. Okay, so it works both ways. Okay. Now, this is a case where the Dreadnought can see this tank. Okay, the tank is right there in plain sight. It is a little bit hidden, so again, we'll get a cover save. And it doesn't matter that the Dreadnought is shooting through a friendly unit. Okay, friendly units do not block your own line of sight. However, if there's an enemy unit blocking the way, it used to be that you had to shoot the very first enemy that you could see, but you can shoot any enemy that you want now, but any intervening models will give a cover save to the opponent. So just keep that in mind, but as long as you have line of sight to something, you can choose to shoot it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this first episode of this 10-part series on how to play Warhammer. Please leave your comments and suggestions below on how we can improve this series, and we'll be back soon with episode 2. See you next time.